Hello, I'm Doug Jones, United States Senator for the great state of Alabama. I want to thank Thomas Raines and the Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr. Institute for giving me the opportunity to participate in Law Day 2020, especially since the focus this year is on one of my favorite amendments to the United States Constitution. But before I get to that, I want to talk for just a minute about Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr., the namesake of this institute, who's one of my legal heroes and who I hope you will take the time to learn more about. President Eisenhower appointed Frank M. Johnson to the Federal District Court in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, 1 year after the Supreme Court's watershed decision in Brown v. Board of Education. The South, and especially Alabama, was in the throes of the Civil Rights Movement, and Judge Johnson stepped right into the midst of it. 3 weeks after he took his seat on the federal bench, a courageous black seamstress named Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger on a Montgomery bus as required by a Montgomery bus segregation law. In a sign of things to come, Judge Johnson's first major ruling was joining a 3-judge majority declaring that particular law unconstitutional. Judge Johnson went on to serve on the district court for 24 years until President Jimmy Carter elevated him to the Court of Appeals, where he served another 13 years, taking senior status in 1992. During his almost 4 decades on the bench, Judge Johnson's rulings transformed the South, desegregating schools, buses, libraries, restaurants, parks, airports, and other public places. His momentous decisions, handed down despite threats and intimidation that included cross burnings in his front yard, landed him on the cover of Time magazine in 1967 as one of the most important men in America. In 1995, Judge Johnson was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Bill Clinton, who said what so many knew about Judge Johnson, that he exemplified an unwavering commitment to equality under the law. On a personal level, because of Judge Johnson's extraordinary career as a jurist, it is often overlooked that he started his federal service as the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama in Birmingham, a position I held before my election to the Senate. I'm incredibly honored and humbled to have been one of Frank M. Johnson's successors in that office. Because of Judge Johnson's courage, I think it's fitting then that the Frank M. Johnson Jr. Institute should be sponsoring this Law Day event commemorating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment that, at long last, gave American women the right to vote and to help move them toward equality under the law. Many of the women's suffrage movement leaders were also anti-slavery advocates, and they, like Judge Johnson, fought for equality despite threats and intimidation. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, Lucretia Coffin Mott, Lucy Burns, Dorothy Day, and many, many others persisted despite being ridiculed, arrested, beaten, and tortured. Through their efforts and countless others across the country, the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote was ratified on August 18, 1920, 132 years after the Constitution itself was ratified. But while the ratification of the 19th Amendment may have brought a successful ending to the women's suffrage movement, it also signaled a new beginning to achieve true equality for women in this country. You see, equality under the law isn't achieved by decree or legislation. It takes commitment, education, and determination, and we are still working towards that goal in this country for women and minorities. The value of women's participation in our public life really can't be overstated, but it certainly can be traced back to the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Women voters and women who have been elected to office have a tremendous impact at all levels of government, whether they are leading the charge, making executive decisions, casting the critical votes, or working behind the scenes. I know this firsthand because I would not have been elected to the United States Senate without the tremendous support I received from women voters. It's a fact, and it's one I'll never forget. So I guess you now know why the 19th Amendment is one of my favorites. But let me give you another example of power of enfranchising women. Most of you have likely heard of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Some of you may have heard of Lilly Ledbetter from Jacksonville, Alabama. Few of you may have heard of U.S. Senators Susan Collins, Olympia Snowe, Kay Bailey Hutchison, or Lisa Murkowski. But every single one of these women played a critical role in protecting people in this country from pay discrimination. It all started with Lilly Ledbetter, who got a job as the manager at the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Plant in Gadsden, Alabama in 1979. Lilly worked hard and earned a promotion to area manager, but she was continually harassed and isolated by the mostly male workforce. After almost 20 years at the plant, just as she was getting ready to retire, someone left Lilly an anonymous note telling her that her male colleagues were paid significantly more than she was. She filed a discrimination claim and took her case to federal court. Although Lilly won her case at trial, the company appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, and in a 5-4 decision, the court ruled against her. They didn't find that Lilly had not been discriminated against, only that her claims were filed too late. But Justice Ginsburg understood that in circumstances like Lilly's, the victim of discrimination often doesn't even know about the unfair treatment before the time to file a claim has passed. So in her dissenting opinion, Justice Ginsburg explained how the majority's conclusion was totally at odds with the robust protection against workplace discrimination Congress intended Title VII to secure, and she challenged Congress to correct the situation. And Congress tried. A bill was drafted and filed, but it failed with the vote split along party lines. Undaunted, Lilly's advocates filed a bill again in the next Congress. But this time, all 4 Republican women senators, Collins, Snowe, Hutchison, and Murkowski, voted in favor of the bill, and the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was signed into law by President Obama on January 29, 2009. It was his first piece of legislation he signed as president. Persistence, a dedication to right a wrong. After 11 years, Lilly Ledbetter's persistence with the help of a woman Supreme Court justice and 4 women senators finally resulted in a change in the law that would help protect against wage discrimination, not just on the basis of gender, but also national origin, race, age, religion, and disability. Lilly wasn't able to change the outcome of her own case, but she changed things for the future, for those who came after her. Here's another example from just last year. One of my proudest accomplishments as a senator was securing the repeal of the so-called military widow's tax. The widow's tax wasn't really a tax. It was an offset of death benefits from 2 different government sources, which had the effect of depriving surviving spouses of our servicemen and women who died from service-related illnesses or injuries of a significant portion of the funds they expected to receive. Most of them didn't even know about the offset until they'd lost their spouse, the absolute worst time to find out that you don't have the benefits you were counting on to help you carry on. For almost 20 years, widows of servicemen came to Capitol Hill to lobby members of Congress for the repeal of the widow's tax. Like Lilly Ledbetter, these women were working to change things for the future, knowing they couldn't undo the fairness they had suffered in the past. But each year, it never happened. When I found out about this problem, I decided it would be my #1 issue for inclusion in the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act. So the women who had been lobbying for this repeal for so many years met with me and my staff. Together, we strategized, and they mobilized. These women spent their own money and took their own time to come back to Capitol Hill again and meet with their representatives. They called, they wrote letters, they wrote emails, and they showed up for town halls. And they did it for months, and they did it by the hundreds. They did so much effective work that my Senate colleagues, staffers, were telling my staff, we've just got to pass this thing so these widows will quit calling our office 95 times a day. And we were successful. Although I get a lot of credit for making this happen, the credit really goes to these women who raised their voices and never gave up. But if they hadn't had the right to vote and thus could affect the outcome of elections, it's likely their voices would not have been heard. Persistence, a dedication to right a wrong. More and more women are finding their voices, flexing their voting muscles, running for and being elected to public office. Today in the 116th Congress, 26 of 100 U.S. senators and 101 of 435 House members are women. The Speaker of the United States House of Representatives is a woman. In Alabama, our governor is a woman, and 22 of the 140 seats in our state legislature are held by women. Nationwide, there are 9 women governors and 90 women holding statewide elective offices, in addition to the thousands of women at all levels of state and local government. You know, when Judge Johnson took the federal bench in 1995, there had only been 4 women appointed to the federal bench, 1 to the Court of Appeals, 1 to the District Court, and 2 to the U.S. Customs Court. Today, there are 455 female federal judges, about a third of the federal judiciary, including 3 of the 9 seats on the Supreme Court. And there is little doubt that one day soon we will elect a woman President of the United States. But I'll close by going back to what I said earlier, that despite these gains and successes, we still have a ways to go toward fairness and equality for all people in this country, regardless of gender, race, religion, or ethnicity. So as you reflect on Judge Johnson, the 19th Amendment, and what Law Day means to you, I encourage each of you to think about ways that you in your own lives can contribute to that effort. You don't have to become a lawyer or a judge or even an elected official, because equality matters in all aspects of our lives, and you can make a difference.